Pretty much, she needs an S on her chest for Superwoman. She's a
I felt quite different to other Irish people because my mother is Polish.
okay.
So, and I grew up, and Ireland was like very different in the 80s. You know, there was no foreign people really. So my mother like felt very self-conscious where we grew up. She stood out because she wasn't Irish, and so we had like non-Irish names, like quite unusual names. So like Yolanda is a Latin name. I think I've just always been curious. I've always had this kind of like inquisitive mind, and I mean, you probably find this as well since you're doing this podcast, but I'm quite fascinated by people and by information. Oh, no, tell me what you think is black and white. I'm very curious.
I'm black. You're white. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Yolanda Barker.
Hi.
Martins.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Chapters, episode 2 of season 2. Today, I'm bringing you a special guest in the building. I always bring special guests in the building, but this lady is pretty much, she needs an S on her chest for Superwoman. She's a yoga teacher, a writer, a videographer, and her award-winning documentary, Serial Killers, which actually questions the conventional accepted information about diet. She has gone through struggling with anxiety and depression, and now helps people through compassion and science. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Yolanda Barker.
Hi. Oh God, my biography sounds really weird read back to me.
It is all good. Welcome to the show. Thank you for giving me your time. So let us begin. I always start by saying, if your life was a book, what chapter do you think you're on?
I actually answered this question to somebody recently, and I thought of it more like as in volumes.
Okay.
So not so much chapters, but like I think I got to like volume 6 or something. It was more. I feel like my life has gone in big clumps of like groups of years where they've all had the same theme, and so like 1 to 18 was like one volume. Wow. And then Leaving Home was like another volume.
Your life is like a mini series. I like it. So you have mini series in the chapters, or we can swap the volumes for chapters. Let's just say there are many roads in these volumes or chapters. I like it. I like it. So you would say you're on volume 6, and in each volume, there are different stories that's led you to where you are now. So let's go back to volume 1. So in volume 1, where were you born? Where were you raised? And how was life growing up as a kid?
So I was born in a city in Ireland called Limerick. And oh God, I wasn't prepared for this question. Yeah,
let's go back. I'm sure
I always felt what?
I said, I'm sure life was wonderful as a kid. So you can't forget it so soon.
I felt quite different to other Irish people because my mother is Polish.
Okay.
So, and I grew up, and Ireland was like very different in the 80s. You know, there was no foreign people really. So my mother like felt very self-conscious where we grew up. She stood out because she wasn't Irish, and so we had like non-Irish names, like quite unusual names. So like Yolanda is a Latin name. You know, it's not. Everyone else is like Aoife and Audrey and Kira. So yeah, and then I had like this dual upbringing where I used to spend 3 months a year in Poland. So I always felt a little bit different, you know, in Limerick where I grew up.
Do you feel that difference has affected you, contributed to the kind of person you are today? So I assume you speak Polish?
Yeah.
Okay. And you say your mother was quite conscious. Did you feel that consciousness growing up? Did you feel you were different? I mean, you did mention that you've always felt different from a normal Irish person. I mean, you sound Irish, so I don't know what would be so different. Have you always felt that you've been different as a kid?
Yeah, I felt different. My siblings kind of seemed to fit in better than me, but I mean, it's sort of a cliche, isn't it? Like a lot of creative people feel different growing up because they don't fit the status quo necessarily. Yeah, I think I was just quite a bit of a dreamer as well.
Oh, there's
So
nothing wrong with dreaming. It's not even.
I
How many siblings do you
was a bit away with the fairies.
have?
That's an expression that we use in Ireland for somebody who's just like off in there in a fantasy land all the time.
Well,
Um,
if you could be in the fantasy land as long as you live it. How many siblings do you have?
Older sister and younger brother.
Oh, so you're in the middle. In the middle. Okay. And did anybody ever say you're feeling different? Make you, oh my gosh, you're such a middle child. You know how you have the so-called stereotypes of middle children always feeling different. What
Yeah,
tagged as that as growing up?
yeah, Jan Brady.
Crazy. All good. So growing up, so 3 months in Poland every year till how old? And then so you did 3 months in Poland and then you go back to Ireland.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Until I was 18 and I left home and I started making my own decisions, really.
Okay. And so you were 18. And when you say you left home, you left Ireland. And where did you move to?
Well, I just left Limerick, the city I grew up in, and I moved to Dublin,
Okay.
where I went to university. And I studied English literature. I always, yeah, I kind of, I always wanted to be a filmmaker, like from around the age of 9, I'd say. After I saw The Little Mermaid, I was like, this is it, I'm going to work for Disney. And um, but yeah, my parents wanted me to get like a regular degree before I went on to do film stuff. So I I always had a passion for English lit as well, so I studied that.
Okay. You mentioned your mom and your mom being Polish. I take it your dad is Irish.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you sound like okay. So they wanted you to have a degree. They wanted you to go into what you would probably describe as a secure job. Growing up in the 80s and all that. So Little Mermaid is your big inspiration. Love that cartoon. Sebastian, lovely character. So that it was pretty much you wanted to work for Disney. So you read English lit and in Dublin, and then you finished university. And then what was your next move? But before you answer that, the fantasies that you said you always had, and as a creative, you felt different. What were those fantasies?
So I think I was actually like highly stressed as a child. I didn't really feel like I belonged. I didn't really fit in, or I felt like I didn't fit in. And so I would create these fantasy worlds to kind of escape into, worlds where I did belong and I was like the hero of my story. And but yeah, I think it was like a coping mechanism for what I now see was like undiagnosed anxiety.
So so in other words, if you look at this now, the anxiety started pretty much when you were a child. And it builds its way up to so when did you feel that when was that point that it got to that the anxiety and the stress and the depression just came out?
I'd say when I was a teenager, yeah, when I was about 14, I felt, yeah, I just felt terrible. Like I was an emo before it was a thing. Um, and yeah, I had a really good friend back then who was like, her parents were quite cool and they were into acupuncture and all this stuff, and she knew that she had depression. And so she kind of helped me identify that that was what was going on with me, just like this heavy, sad feeling all the time. Um, and yeah, we used to like write poetry. We were so emo. Um, and yeah, and just talk about our feelings and stuff. And but it was helpful, to actually have someone who was aware of this kind of stuff. And because I think probably a lot of teenagers back then suffered with depression and anxiety, but like in Ireland in the 90s, it just, you know, people didn't know anything about it really. Like there's still a lot of stigma about mental health globally. But I feel like Ireland was sort of behind, you know, because the Catholic Church still had like quite a strong hold on Irish people, like even into the 80s. So it wasn't that progressive in terms of like health and wellness or anything like that.
Okay, so
Um,
if you
so
if you go back to when you were 14, and that's when you remember that that's when it kind of occurred to you that there's something wrong here. There's a feeling I'm feeling that I can't explain. But you carried this all through, even to university. How were you coping through those early years, growing older and going into university, having a social life? How did that impact your creativeness and your life generally?
uh, you know, to be honest, it was a struggle. Like I had good times, obviously, um, but yeah, my mental health was a struggle, like for most of my life. Um, I would get really, really socially anxious. So find it very hard to socialize unless I got inebriated, you know. And like when I went out, I would just chain smoke, and because I was just running on this like high anxiety, you know. And then sometimes I would just feel too anxious and just wouldn't be able to go out and socialize. Um, and yeah, but I mean, there were good times as well where I felt more confident and, you know, was able to be more social. um but I think those like darker periods did really fuel my creativity, because all I you know, I wasn't like interacting with people outside. I ended up writing a lot, you know, like journaling, writing a lot of poetry, writing stories. um and even, you know, I started like creating sets, like on a minor, very very small level. I would create sets like this size and make little characters. And um so it was, you know, I'd write songs and stuff. So yeah, it was good creatively, but at the same time I don't like this kind of trope of the tortured artist either. I think that's quite unhelpful, and people often think that like you need to suffer in order to be creative. um, but I don't think that's true, because while suffering does kind of like compel you to go and search for a method of dealing with it, and creativity is a good outlet. um, yeah, it can also be frustrating, because when you're stuck in a cycle of like poor mental health, it's hard to bring an idea through to completion, if you know what I mean.
So you went through all this while you were in university. You and then so you graduate. How long were you in university for? You graduated. How old were you?
Uh, 20, 21 when I graduated, yeah.
21. And throughout the period of university, you are going through this feeling, anxiety, going back to have a routine of creating stuff and being more creative, but you were still going through all that. Okay.
Mm.
And then, so you finished university, and then what happened after that? Did you leave Dublin? Well, what happened? Did you move to England?
No, stayed in Dublin, and I went to film school. And that was sort of a big turning point. I would say that was volume three. Um, yeah, that was a big turning point, because it was, you know, I'd never been interested in school really. I didn't apply myself. Even at university, like I never went to a full week of lectures. I just, I don't know, in Ireland we say that you DOS. Like I was just DOSing all the time. Do you
Well,
say that in the UK as well?
no, no, no. So I did university in Ghana, and I know exactly what you mean about not going to a full week lesson. I was a professional at skipping school.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes I ask myself, I wonder how I made it. But I was in. See, the good thing when you look at it now, when you think back, is you were missing classes, but you were still being creative. I was doing nothing. I can't even explain what I was doing. but it's not my story. Let's talk about you. So you were Dawson, as you say.
Dancing. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had a social life in university as well. So, um, but yeah, I never went to a full week of lectures. And even though I loved English literature, I just wasn't, I just wasn't very academic. Like I didn't like the whole um, academic format. So anyway, when I went to film school, I didn't know myself, suddenly, because I actually wanted to go. I turned up every day on time. I never missed a class really. And I worked so hard because I was actually interested in what I was doing. I just like this fire just kind of like exploded in me. Um, and yeah, and also I was studying with like really, really nice people, like people who I just felt were totally on my wavelength. Um, so it was fun, and then at the same time, I met another group of people like and started going clubbing a lot. So those two things.
Dropping the moves. I can imagine now. Creatives dropping the moves. That must have been nice.
I mean, yeah, Irish people can't dance,
No,
so yeah.
you're not probably one of the best dancers in the world in terms of specific kind of dancing. So yeah, I'm sure.
A
I'm
very
sure.
specific kind of dancing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
you can drop
Just
those
like
moves with
just
any genre.
moving your head. Yeah.
Yes. So you said you felt like you met people that are in the same wavelength. Is this because there were other creatives, or is it more to it?
Yeah, they were creative, but it was just a lot of fun. They were all like, yeah, them and the people that I started like going clubbing with were all just quite down to earth, very unpretentious, just very cool people. So yeah, my world just really expanded, over that year. And then for the next few years, it kind of continued.
How long was film school for? And when did you finish? What year did you finish film school?
So I finished in 2005. It was just 1 year.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I was really lucky. Like basically, as soon as I finished, I got a job, which is like really, really rare. But yeah, I got a job as an editor in a post-production house. So yeah, I started my first job
And this is back in Ireland as well.
still in Dublin. Yeah, yeah.
So you did mention that you went through anxiety and depression in 2004. And then how did you start overcoming that feeling? I mean, film school sounded like it really went well. You enjoyed yourself. You met people on the same wavelength. So now the anxiety and depression that you used to feel, had you had started working on it at this point. When was the turning point? Apart from film school being wonderful, to yourself, when did you actually tell myself, you know what, I've reached a turning point here, and I'm beginning to see things better or try and work on myself better?
Probably 2015.
Okay, 2015. Well, that's so we have to forward another 11 years. We'll get there. We'll get there. So you said you're a yoga teacher. Where did you discover yoga while doing all this and working in the post production?
So I think that was in like 2006. Yeah, I was an atheist for, from the age of 13 until the age of around 23.
Okay.
And then yeah, I had a spiritual awakening when I was about 23. One night on magic mushrooms. Um, and that like, yeah, that just completely changed my life. And I got into meditation, I got into yoga. I kind of had this like spiritual honeymoon, after that. And yeah, that was another big turning point.
Okay, so you have had, I mean, magic mushrooms. I have no idea how that works, but seems like it kind of put you in some sort of realm and showed you a different concept or different way of life. So, and getting into spirit, how would you define you getting into or becoming more spiritual? What would you define that as?
Yeah, it was like when, I was brought up Catholic, and when I was a kid, I was like super religious. Even though neither of my parents were, I was just really into it. And then I like totally abandoned it and became atheist. But I actually think that atheism is also a spiritual choice, because
Okay.
it requires like actually thinking about your beliefs and coming to a decision. Um, and then, yeah, so I think I've always been spiritual, but it just has taken different forms. And yeah, I guess the most recent form is just like this this awareness that we're very small. We're part of something much bigger. Actually, Bill Hicks, the comedian, summed it up best. He said, "We're one consciousness experiencing ourselves subjectively." And yeah, that's sort of the sense that I started to get, like that I was part of this much bigger thing. And I could only really see my perspective, but I had the sense that I was part of something much bigger.
So going,
Not like this parental God that like rules your life or anything, but just like, yeah, this one consciousness.
okay. So going into your first job as you finished film school in 2005, and how did that go? How were the jobs coming? How did you get into? Did you just what were the movies or documentaries? Well, how did you get into becoming making your craft even better?
So yeah, I was lucky, the man that I worked for had worked with like a lot of successful Irish directors. And when I started the job, I was the assistant editor, but within 2 months the main editor left the company, so I basically got promoted to doing all the work, because it was a post-production house. So I became the main editor. So I I improved like really quickly, and I had my boss's guiding hand, and he was always really encouraging. Like he thought I had like a natural flair for it. Um, so I think I stayed there for about 2 years, and we did like a lot of corporate stuff, but we had some interesting clients. Like Guinness were one of our clients, and Jameson, and so we
Oh,
did
I like
some.
Jameson.
Yeah, I love Jameson.
Very big fan.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, and I mean it was good just to have, yeah, to have that kind of structure, of going into work every day and improving. And then I just got to a certain point where like I wasn't improving anymore. I'd kind of gone as far as I could go in that job. And I also didn't really want to be an editor. I wanted to be a director. So I started working on, while I was still in that job, I started working on a documentary about graffiti. Um, so there was like Ireland had a very interesting graffiti scene, which is maybe a story for another day. But I just started to become fascinated by it and started to make this documentary. And then yeah, I just ended up leaving the job and focusing on making that documentary instead.
How do you see you're an award-winning documentary filmmaker, and how do you when you decided I want to start directing and doing documentaries initially, I assume no sponsorship. It's something you have to do from your pocket, and you start, trying to get things done. How big is that difficulty in terms of trying to establish yourself in with docu-series? And when with all that happening, were you still having hints of any anxiety or depression, or were you just dealing with it or hiding behind work?
Mm, I was definitely hiding behind work. Yeah, I, yeah. I mean, I was definitely a workaholic for certain periods in my life. Work is like a very socially acceptable addiction. Um, but yeah, it was always there. Like the mental health stuff was always there. I think once I had the spiritual awakening, I actually started to take a bit of responsibility for it and started to read some self-help books and go for therapy and stuff and look to improve my mental health. But but yeah, it's just so easy to be addicted to things as well. It's like it's the easiest coping mechanism. Um, and the start of your question, in terms of establishing yourself, I wouldn't say I'm not established now. Like I did win an award for one of my documentaries, but the the filmmaking thing was really hard. You know, when I compare it to like how easily my book kind of came about, like I got a publishing deal really easily. I have an amazing agent with the biggest literary agency in the country, and that just happened really naturally. And then when I compare that to my film career, it's been hard, you know, the whole time. It's like those doors haven't really opened for me in the same way that they have in the book world.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, she has published a book called The Breathing Revolution, which was published by Bloomsbury, September 2021. It's on Audible and every other place you can get your book. Um, the thing with that is, you mentioned how getting into writing a book and being published was easier. Would you say you see it as easier because you've been writing since you were a kid and it comes naturally to you, where you decided to go into documentaries a bit later on? Is that why you think that's what the issue is here?
Maybe. I don't know. Like, I don't even. There's a part of me that thinks like maybe that's my path. I mean, I'm not even sure if I believe that we have a predestined path, but sometimes doors just seem to open in certain areas just so much more easily than others, and it makes me wonder. It's like it feels like something is kind of going like, yeah, go this way. Hint, hint. Um, and yeah, I just feel with the filmmaking, I was just like bashing my head against a wall for a long time. Um, and yeah, I mean, the reason I got into documentary was because the in film school, like most of my lecturers were documentary filmmakers. I hadn't really known much about documentary beforehand, but they opened my eyes to it, and I love the medium. I'd always wanted to like create fiction, but it hasn't happened that way at all. Like I've ended up doing mostly factual stuff. Even my book, you know, is factual.
Would you say so? You did mention you're an atheist, and you believe it's a spirituality that comes with it because you question everything that you know and you try and look for something else that you want to know. With your documentaries, especially, so your award-winning documentary is serial killers. Questioning the conventional accepted information about diet. As being an atheist, would you say it helps you being in terms of documenting or trying to make documentaries because you always want to know, you always want to question things, and you want to question the norm? Is that where you get your push from in terms of documentaries, or looking for some sort of solutions with your writing?
Well, I'm not an atheist anymore. I stopped being an atheist when I was about 23. Um, but I think I think I've just always been curious. I've always had this kind of like inquisitive mind, and I, yeah, I mean, you probably find this as well since you're doing this podcast, but I'm quite fascinated by people and by information, and I always want to get to the truth, you know. And I think there's a lot of bullshit out there, to be honest. So I always like give things that I read a wide berth.
How do you smell the bullshit? How do you go, you know what? I'm going to question this. How do you smell the bullshit?
I just feel when things go into like hysteria or fear mongering, or where it's oversimplified, um, because I think like you know, people say truth is simple. I actually think that life is incredibly complex. So, and I think when I see people looking at things in very black and white terms, I'm just like, that doesn't resonate with me. I think that life is much more kind of gray, you know, it's more nuanced. And so, but it's
So,
very difficult to explain that.
yeah, I was just going to ask, so if you think life is great, are you say, so surely there are some black and white situations or black and white aspects of life, not everything is gray, you would say. Or
What's that saying, like try everything once except incest or something, you know?
I've never heard that said.
Oh, really? I think it's actually try everything once except, yeah, I don't know.
We'll take the first one. Take the first one.
Well, you know, isn't a lot of it down to our perspective though? Like, I mean, we feel like it's wrong to kill each other, but you know, we come from chimpanzees who, you know, they're actually like really murderous mammals. They engage in a lot of the same behaviors as humans do. You know, even like ethnic cleansing and stuff like that. But because they don't have that like moral code, they don't judge it as right or wrong. So, like, obviously, I think it's wrong to kill people. But so yeah, I guess I do believe in certain absolutes. Um, but I think most things are kind of complex. You know, ideas about right and wrong. Uh, yeah, some people's ideas of right and wrong are like incredibly rigid. You know, some people are like drugs are bad,
Yep.
and like that to me that's like an incredibly black and white perspective. You've got to do more research into, and then if you actually look at like why we have that message that drugs are bad, you see that there's actually a lot of corruption behind that, because this whole thing was started like back in the, I think in the 40s in America. There was some politician who basically just like was at risk of losing his job, and so he started a campaign against cannabis. Um, and yeah, they started like this campaign called Reefer Madness, that like cannabis made you crazy, and none of it was based in science. It was all just fear mongering, but that has persisted, you know, which is like led to this whole thing that drugs are bad. And yes, drugs are bad in some contexts, like when they're overdone. Um, and but yeah, that kind of black and white mentality has actually fueled like the drug war. You know, making drugs illegal has led to a lot of other problems. Instead of trying to understand the subject, people have just gone like, no, not interested, you know, drugs are bad. That's just one example, but like that, people
It
do that
is.
with everything.
It is a good example. I do agree with you that certain things are gray. I also believe certain things are straightforward and black and white. But that'll probably be another episode of chapters when you come back after winning like 5 more documentaries, and make sure I'm the first person that has exclusive to it. In your book, you explored.
Oh no, tell me what you think is black and white. I'm very curious.
I'm black. You're white. That's very simple. There's no complex things about. There's no complexity there at all. It's very straight to the point, straightforward.
But I mean, it's just a skin deep difference.
It is the best way to describe it, though. Well, until we try and go deep into it, and then it might be different. But for now, hey, this is this is what I know. This is what I know. Your book does mention the fusion of science and compassion in order to help mental health conditions. Can you describe that? How do you fuse them together, science and compassion?
Well, because I started on a spiritual path like at quite a young age, yeah, I've kind of fallen into all the pitfalls that there were with spirituality. Like it can be very ungrounded, you know, and then science can be sometimes I don't know. I don't know. I'm not speaking about scientists now, but I'm talking about like the average person who believes in science.
Mhm.
Often they can be quite rigid.
Yep.
So spirituality can often be quite like out there, and then science can be quite rigid. But I think both of them have like a place. And I just found that by looking at science like quite carefully and bringing spirituality into that, I just found a much deeper understanding of both. Does that make sense? I feel like I just waffled there.
So it makes some sort of understanding to what you mean by the fusion, and I understand what you mean by the science. Is so by compassion, do you mean in terms of how you implement the science in a more human
Oh,
way, or
right.
What do you mean by that? The compassion aspect.
So what do I mean by compassion? Well, to me, compassion is like really seeing someone and accepting them as they are. And when I was younger and like earlier on the spiritual path, I thought compassion meant like letting people do whatever they wanted, you know, letting people take advantage and letting people be rude and cruel and whatnot. And now I understand that it's like that's just having weak boundaries, you know, like that's just codependency. So yeah, compassion is just like seeing people for who they are and accepting them like with love, but not putting up with crappy treatment, you know. And when I say I fuse it with science, it's more like the way I understand spirituality now is a lot of these spiritual principles that I believe in have actually been proven by science. It's just not very I guess it's it's just not very well known. Like it's not really so woo woo as people think it is, you know. Like they've done loads of, for example, yoga. They've done like loads of studies into yoga now, which has proven like the benefits that it has. And then if you actually look at the history of yoga and the theory behind yoga, you start to see that like the people that created yoga already knew what it did. The stuff that science is just proving now, the people who created yoga already knew that it did that. So when I say I bring science into it, that's more just like the kind of grounding aspect to the spirituality. It's like, oh, okay, this has been proven. Actually, this means this. So it's translating this spiritual language into something much more accessible. And the compassion is almost like separate. I mean, that's just really when I look at people who are suffering, like I have their back. You know, I want people to know that I'm on their side when I'm trying to help them. Whereas sometimes in the self-help world, there can be a lot of like criticism and judgment, and people do that a lot to themselves, especially. So
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I like it. I like it. I like the concept of fusing science and compassion and trying to help mental health. You did mention that you actually got to a very comfortable point with your anxiety and depression in 2015. What was that point? How did you finally get to that point that you could manage it and pretty much get over it?
so that, well, I wouldn't say get over it, not to split hairs, but it's more just like a gradual, it becomes less intense, you know, as the years pass. Once, so basically I discovered breath work. I was going to say breathing, but like you can't really discover breathing, but I discovered how I could use my breath actually to alleviate some of my symptoms. um, and that's where, you know, breath work is a really big part of yoga, and the like the ancient people that created yoga believed that breathing exercises were like the fastest way to enlightenment. So I always knew that because I was a yoga teacher, and I was just like, yeah, whatever. um, you know, I kind of didn't pay too much attention to it. I was more interested in like the physical postures, which a lot of Western people are basically. um, but yeah, I sort of had this revelation, and I realized like, oh my god, like changing how I breathe actually changes how I feel. And I started just doing breathing exercises, and also started to retrain how, because basically I was breathing very dysfunctionally, and that was actually adding to my mental health problems. The way you breathe actually affects your mental health. So when you change how you breathe, it has a positive effect on your mental health. and also on your fitness and stuff as well. Like I'm so much fitter now than I've ever been. And a lot of that has just been from changing my breathing and getting a dog.
What is your dog's name? I actually met your dog the first time I met you. Was nice, really cute guy. What's his name again?
His name is Raimi, after
Raimi.
after Sam Raimi, the film director.
Oh, okay, okay. So Raimi, so
Spider-Man.
Raimi is like your best friend. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're pretty much everywhere with Raimi, which is good, which is good. So in terms of your book, does your book describe how to learn that breathing, or is it something that you have to do is years of practice, or do you have to do yoga to learn how to breathe that way?
No, not at all. No. Yeah, my book goes through it actually. I broke breathing down into like 7 main qualities that you could change. Um, and the book kind of covers all of those. And some of them are really simple. It's just like, breathe through your nose instead of through your mouth. Um, and then others are like more complicated, like looking at the rhythm of your breath. um, I think one of the hardest ones is like making sure that you breathe in the right part of your body. So a lot of people breathe like too high up in the chest, which actually lends itself to anxiety because it induces something in the nervous system called the fight flight response. um, and then other people breathe too far down, like into the belly, and that can kind of lead to like low energy and some depressive symptoms. um, so the ideal is that you're breathing like through the bottom of the ribs, where your diaphragm is. And that's actually one of the hardest things to change about your breathing, because often, like through years of just breathing the wrong way, people's diaphragms can become stiff, people's ribs can become inflexible. So that takes a bit of time actually changing that aspect. Um, but yeah, my book goes through it all. But that was like a massive change, once I started learning about the breath and how to breathe properly. Because I had like, yeah, I mean, I had like, I was having undiagnosed anxiety attacks, on the regular. Um, and when I started to learn about my breathing, I started to identify these anxiety attacks and was actually able to like breathe my way out of them, basically.
Well, that is really good. That is really good. I haven't read your book yet. I'm so glad it's on Audible because I'm an Audible guy. So I will definitely have a read and probably try and. I mean, I have a good equipment for breathing here, as you can see, it's very nice, and I can probably help myself to improve in any way I can. So now, what is now that the book is out, the Breathing Revolution? What are you working on, movie wise, filmmaking wise, documentary? Anything we should look forward to seeing?
I think it'll be a while, but I've just started talking to my agent about 2 new books. They're both about dogs
Okay.
because that's my new thing. Yeah, I'm the kind of person, like I get really, really into something for a few years and like learn everything about it and become a bit of an expert and then move on to the next thing. So yeah, when I got my puppy, I noticed like a huge improvement to my mental health again. um, and there's also again like loads of science that validates like why dogs have such a beneficial effect on people's mental health, and like why they're used in the treatment of PTSD and all these different kinds of things. The dogs can actually help to regulate your nervous system. And then for people with depression, they provide structure. And people with anxiety, I feel like that's why I bring Raimi everywhere with me. That's why he was at that gig that I met you at. It's like, because when he's there, I don't feel so anxious, because I have something else to focus on. He kind of allows me to go out of myself. Um, so yeah, I'm starting to develop an idea about a health and wellness book about how dogs can improve your mental health, basically, and how if you have a dog, you can sort of do like really basic things with them to help them like support you emotionally. And the other idea is a novel about it's for young adults, and it's about like a 17-year-old girl who gets a dog. But it's about puppy farms and stuff. It's quite dark.
Yeah, well, we shall be on the lookout. I mean, shout out to Momento Sounds. I mean, wonderful violinists. They are the reason why Yolanda and I met. It was a nice, intimate gig for their friends and fans. So, good things come up from this event. Me speaking to a filmmaker, author. So, Mike, do you still? So you mentioned you get into things, and once you learn them and understand them, then you move on to the next one. Do you still hide behind work? Does it still affect your social life? What do you do when you're not working and hanging around with Rema?
Oh, it's really
Me, sorry.
It's okay. Well, I just moved into a new flat, so I've been like getting that sorted. Um, yeah, life has been opening back up. I mean, I went I went to the Village Underground clubbing last weekend.
So the
Um,
the clubbing still continues from film school. You're still dropping the moves, huh?
yeah, but like very sporadically now and very soberly. Um, yeah, like I hardly drink. I'm a very moderate drinker now. Um, so yeah, just the usual things, like I go for dinner with friends, uh, go to the cinema. I went to see Hamilton at the theater on Sunday with my brother.
Nice.
That was really good. Yeah, I'm like, now that life has started again, I'm like just lapping up all the culture. Um, went to see an amazing show in Sadler's Wells a couple of weeks ago, like absolutely amazing, called Message in a Bottle. It was like a dance performance all set to Sting's music.
Oh, very nice.
Um, yeah, it was absolutely, like, I mean, I cried at the end, it's like really sad. Um,
Well, with tears, ladies and gentlemen, it must mean it must be a happy ending. Yes, tears of joy, I hope, not tears of sadness.
no, very sad. It like wasn't the ending you'd expect. Yeah. Anyway, I'm really into culture, so that's how I spend my time.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's been wonderful. And I mean, volume, we have gone through a couple of things in the different volumes slash chapters in your life. And it's wonderful to go from where you felt you didn't belong to finding a place for yourself, finding Remy, and, getting to evolve in other cultures and do things that you like to do. Well, the Breathing Revolution is out, ladies and gentlemen. It was out September 2021. Feel free to read the book, listen to the book, and of course, it's yolandabarker.co.uk if you want to follow this wonderful lady to continue on her journey. Hopefully, when you, as I tell people on chapters, we're friends forever. Hopefully, you come back and we'll explore volume or chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll just keep going and going till the documentary is actually about you and me.
Or until I'm dead.
And now, yeah, I don't think you sell more albums when you're dead, so you never know. You never know. Thank you very
That's
much.
true.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been wonderful having you on chapters, and hopefully we shall be in touch and speak to you soon. Ladies and
Yeah, thanks for
gentlemen,
having
I give you Yolanda Parker. Yeah.